Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 249th episode of Real Hawk Talk. I am Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter at HawkBlogger. And yes, I'm still on Twitter. Yes, there's still some interesting stuff happening there. It has not all collapsed, nor has society crumbled yet. We will hang on for dear life, as we always do. It's part of our duty as Seahawks fans. We've done well so far. We are going to talk tonight about a lot of stuff that I don't know that other people have gotten into yet. I think we're still a little bit ahead of the game on Real Hawk Talk. There's some parts that people are going deeper. Good for them. I think we've started talking draft. We've been talking draft since the beginning of this year. We've been talking that number 5 pick since, really the whole season, watching where that could be. Tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about free agency, and we're going to talk about who's out there, what positions, how to philosophically approach free agency relative to other things. And we're going to talk a little bit, depending on how we do for time, on picks other than that first overall pick for the Seahawks and some potential guys that might be worth thinking about. And John Schneider also had some interesting words today. We will start there. And we always get to our patron questions. Patreon.com/HawkBlogger. If you haven't already, sign up right now, get immediate access to the Slack channel. And you too can ask us questions every week on the show. We've got a bunch. I think we've got like 13 odd questions. We'll see how many we can get to tonight. So before we do, let me bring in the crew, and we will start by introducing Dayna O'Gorman at Dayna OG on Twitter. Dayna, you specifically wanted to be here to talk free agent, so we are happy to have you as always.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that it's completely logical to be super focused on the draft, especially with the number of draft picks that we have and the number of, first round draft picks. That's going to be the focus, right? But I really feel like free agency is super important, either for re-signing players that we already have or, getting a couple of players, because we've had such impact players in free agency before. And I have a ton of questions about it. So I'm excited. It'll be good.
I'm excited as well. Also tonight, Jeff Simmons at Real Jeff Simmons on Twitter. If you haven't already, go to hawkblogger.com right now. There's actually a couple great articles up there. Derek wrote one. He wrote about why the Seahawks should consider a quarterback at the 5th spot. Just goes to show this is an equal opportunity blog and podcast. Even if I vehemently disagree, we are going to air all the different perspectives, because as long as they're well thought out, and Derek's always are. So definitely encourage you to go read that. And then Jeff Simmons today published a look at the defensive side of the ball, which we will definitely talk about today. Jeff, how you doing, man?
I'm all right, Brian. There was a big snowstorm this afternoon here in Toronto. So if my internet cuts out tonight, it's not because of Canada. My whole yard is covered in snow. So it's probably because of Canada. I agree with you. You're not wrong.
Nathan wasn't buying that.
So, yeah, there's a lot to talk about. As Dayna said, there's a lot going on in the next few months. So, as you guys all know, I'm pretty into it.
Yes.
Diving in. So.
Yes, looking forward to it as well. And then finally, but certainly not last or least, I guess he is last in the introductions, but he's not least. Nathan Ernst at Nathan E11. He was first to show up tonight. He was early. Nathan usually a seconds before the show, but tonight he could not wait to get ready to talk Seahawks offseason. How are you doing, Nathan?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. We are at turn of the year. And so at work, we're doing like performance reviews and performance management, and obviously challenging times economically for the world. And trying to figure out the right things to do for people all along is something I actually really enjoy, but it's also really exhausting, going through each and every person in a company and trying to make sure that they are taken care of properly. So that's what's been on my mind. I'm really happy to switch gears and talk about stuff that matters not at all in Seahawks football. Okay, cool. So let's dive in. There's one thing I have to get out of the way that is maybe a brain twister and maybe is totally wrong. So I need you guys, if you know the answer, to tell me. I've been perplexed by this. So the NFL draft order 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The Seahawks have the 5th pick in the draft. And then if you go to the second round, they have the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th pick in the second round. And the Rams are picking above them. Why is that? Does anybody know?
It's because of Miami, isn't it? Because they lost their first round pick.
Switch the order.
Oh, that's true.
Is that how they do tiebreakers?
But why would it switch tiebreakers from the first round to the second round? Does it like flop? You mean maybe?
Does it alternate? Yeah, I don't know. That is interesting.
This has been bothering me. The Seahawks now own the 37th pick. If you go to like Tankathon, it'll show it as the 38th pick, but that's because of what Dayna mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Miami has a forfeited pick in the first round that they're still giving a number to. So it's really the 37th pick. But as of what I can see, the Rams own the 36th pick and they own the 6th pick. So this is weird to me. Anybody else have any idea?
It's not from another team?
No, there's some weird tie-breaking formula. I can't remember what it is specifically, but it's like based on like the previous year's results, like team with the lower record picks under it. It's never made sense to me. I've always had the same reaction as you, Brian. I don't understand why the order would be different.
Yeah, it's confusing. And then if you go to the third round, and this is what gives Nathan's explanation some credence, the Broncos will have the 5th pick again, and the Rams will have the 6th pick. So it is alternating, it seems to be.
Yeah, I can't remember the exact breed. It's so stupid.
It's really stupid. So anyway, I just had to get that out of the way because it's been bugging me. Wanted to make sure I wasn't getting false information, but that's that. I want to start by talking about John Schneider, actually, because John Schneider had an interview today. I don't know if any of you had a chance to actually hear it and not just read what people recapped, but there were some interesting tidbits in there. First of all, did any of you get a chance to actually hear the interview on KJR with Ian Furness?
I heard most of it.
Okay. So before I dive in, Jeff, was there anything that stood out to you in that conversation with John Schneider?
Not really. Like if you listen to him talk, he kind of throws out the same stories and the same tidbits, and he doesn't give a lot of insight in interviews. He'll talk about like the championship contenders line, like he threw that out. How many times has he said that? So like, not really. He said a lot of like almost like the version of coach speak a lot. Like he did talk about how like the biggest thing I took away is he talked about some of the mistakes they've made in the draft and where that's came from and stuff we've talked about in the show over the years. Where they've gone wrong is he talked about that when they've made mistakes, they've drafted for need and hyper focused on one position. And what they did well last year was just take the best player and stuff that Dayna, you haven't been with us as long as the other three, but stuff that we've talked about for so long. So that was the big takeaway for me, and hopefully they're learning from what they did last year. But the rest of it was a lot of what I would call GM coach speak kind of stuff.
Yeah, I thought that was one of the more interesting pieces. And for folks that didn't hear, Ian Furness asked him, he kind of presented it like, hey, initially you and Pete were just drafting for best player available, and then it seemed like you went after need a little bit more, and then like you're trying to find like a backup running back behind Marshawn or a rotational edge rusher, and then you like last year you got back to the classic Schneider approach. Schneider kind of was like, okay, I know what you're saying is that I had shitty drafts, Dick. But handled it with some grace. And he's like, well, he said the wrong year. He said the 2014 draft, but he meant the 2013 draft was a year where if you just look at it, it was one of the worst draft classes across the NFL in like 20 years. Nobody did particularly well. And so there's some of those situations. But then he did say, yeah, we definitely got into situations where we prioritize need a little too high. And that was good to hear. Like, good to hear. And we all talked about, hey, how much did Jody Allen have to do with last year's draft? There's all these conspiracies, which I think is personally kind of funny. I don't really think that's true, but in any event, it's good to hear that they have identified that. He also brought up that they did not necessarily think well about the types of personalities that would succeed when coming into a team that already had a bunch of alpha blue chip players. Like, was someone going to come in and really challenge Earl Thomas when they were playing with Earl Thomas on Madden? Was someone going to really challenge Richard Sherman? Was someone going to really challenge, Marshawn or whoever else? And that they maybe didn't get players that had that kind of alpha mentality. So I thought that was an interesting admission as well. One thing that was totally off in a kind of a different category, but Furness was asking about this year's class or making some comments, and he said a couple things about Derek Young, that he was impressed with Derek Young. And Nathan, I want to give you a chance. I'm putting you in an uncomfortable position because I like to do that to you. Who do you think possibly Ian Furness could have compared Derek Young to, and asked John Schneider if it was a decent comparison? Like, Derek Young, athletic, 7th rounder, can run a little bit, can catch a little bit.
He didn't compare him to Doug Baldwin, did he?
That's a good guess. No, he did
My other
not.
guess was Terrell Owens.
Terrell Owens, interesting. Dayna, do you have any guesses on this one?
No, I was thinking Baldwin but
Cooper Kupp. I love these. This is good.
What about, I don't know, someone like Chase, Jamar Chase? I don't know who.
He compared him to Deebo Samuel.
Oh,
huh.
Okay.
And Schneider said, Schneider was being nice. I don't think he was Schneider didn't bring up this comparison, so I don't want to rip John for that. But he didn't really deflect it either. He was like, yeah, this is a guy who played at a small school. He played more of played a running back kind of role and then became kind of a receiver. And he's a guy that really came up quickly through the season and made, good opportunity, made the most of his opportunities. And that's the right kind of mold of player to think about.
Didn't Deebo go to South Carolina?
Yeah, I don't think Deebo is not a small school guy.
I had the same reaction.
A small SEC group of 5 school.
Yeah, borderline first round pick, same guy.
Yeah, I thought that was obviously a massive stretch.
The one thing is you're thinking about a guy that can do something with the ball in his hands.
Yes.
And you take it to that's why I was going with T.O. is okay, kind of this bigger, so what is the extreme for him? And yeah, I guess sure, Deebo.
Yeah, that was the part that was, laughs aside, I think was interesting. And what people don't always understand is there is this tension between the front office, the personnel department, and the coaching staff. And people don't get this because Pete and John are thick as thieves and tight and all that kind of stuff. But even in that situation, the personnel department thinks there's players that should be getting playing time, and the coaches determine who actually plays. And so Schneider was like, yeah, you want to see the guy like him get opportunities and get more opportunities. And so that was the highlight for me. There was, one, Schneider does believe that Derek Young has a place and should get more run. And 2, that they see his multifaceted talent as something that they're interested in. Whether or not that all plays out, I mean, that's a massive projection from what we saw, but I thought that was interesting as well.
Cool. So I guess we don't need to talk about receivers at 20 since we have Derek Deebo Young on the roster.
That's exactly right.
He did make a comment that he talked about how he had a throwaway line where the receiver market's gone out of control, which made me think that they are scouting receivers.
Yeah, I don't know. I just lost his name. The guy that the Jaguars signed from the Cardinals.
Oh, Christian Kirk.
Yes, yeah. Thank you. That everyone freaked out about that, and it was ruined the wide receiver market. And I think receivers did go on to get paid quite a bit, although I don't know how much it really affected guys like I can't remember any names. The Washington guy or DK, Terry McLaurin. But hey, The Jags made the playoffs. The Jags did so much weird crap in the offseason, and then they got rewarded for it, and they made the playoffs. So I don't know who's smart and who's dumb.
That gets redecided every minute of every day, especially when it comes to NFL front offices. There are a couple other things that John said that were interesting. He did talk about Geno. He did talk about the quarterback position. He talked about Drew Lock. I think there's a little bit of a misquote there. Ian Furness said, would it be an ideal situation to bring back both Geno and Drew? And he said, yeah, it would be ideal. Like, it would have felt different to me if John had said it would be ideal if we could bring back, Drew Lock. Like, I think that was kind of placed. Still, I expect them to do exactly that. And I won't go off on a tirade about why I think that's such a stupid waste of money. I've done that before, but so be it. If the first two signings of this offseason are Jason Myers to the second highest quarterback kicker contract, and then Drew Lock to like an $8 million backup quarterback deal, I'm going to have trouble. I will have trouble. I'm just going to.
Oh man, the discourse is going to be so bad because there's already this weird thing where no one's given up the discussion from the preseason. Like I saw people saying that we should put Drew Lock in the end of that Niners game because it's just like muscle memory. I think just people are so used to they prime themselves so much to go into that season with it's Drew Lock versus Geno. Drew Lock's going to be the starter, right? And if they sign him to $8 million a year and it's the next one, if they sign him before Geno, oh my god.
I need to spend a couple seconds on this with all of you because Evan's not here this week, so we can have an actual some chance of a reasonable discussion on this. I'm still just really confused. Maybe it's exactly what you said, Nathan, that people had their priors or they got in on Drew. I am it boggles my mind how many people are Drew Lock stans. This is a guy I'm going to defend vigorously on Twitter, and to the point of yeah, we should just roll with Drew Lock next year. He's a better option. And what I've pieced it together, as far as I can tell, is a lot of these people believe that Pete Carroll is a system scheme designer that's quarterback friendly. And that the reason they feel that way is because Geno Smith came out of nowhere to be good, and Russell Wilson went from here to Denver and was terrible. And so that means that Pete's the reason that quarterbacks are playing well. And so Drew Lock is just the next obvious, it doesn't matter. We could go sign John Kitna out of retirement and he would just be fine because Pete's made we could take Chase Daniel off the Chargers or whoever else and we'll be fine.
Pete Carroll, the defensive minded coach. Yeah.
Who can't field a defense to save his life.
I know. Right.
Hey, Mark Sanchez, great at USC, decides to come out. Pete gets all huffy, says it's a bad call. Who was right? Who was right? Who was smart and who was dumb?
Matt Leinart.
Pete Carroll, quarterback whisperer.
Is that where we are? Is that where you guys, joking aside, is that where you honestly think about, is Pete a true, quarterback coach? Is that where we've come after all the years of Pete versus Russ? That now the take is oh yeah, Pete will elevate any quarterback in his system.
No, I don't think so. I think we have a lot of tangible examples of that being not true. Charlie Whitehurst, Hasselbeck, I don't know. I wouldn't say that he was worse after he left and wasn't particularly good here in Pete's here. T-Jack continued to be a pretty middling quarterback. Because I can't remember a single name. He was an undrafted guy, but the dude from
Josh
TCU.
Portis.
Who?
No, Josh Portis.
Yeah, also Josh Portis. Yeah. I don't know. That seems like a stretch.
Yeah.
Matt Flynn. Yeah, that was the only one. Yeah.
We won't spend a ton more time on this, but the other thing that is bizarre to me is I also think that that's really selling Geno's year short. I don't think that what made Geno good this year was the scheme. I think the scheme wasn't a problem. But Geno is kind of like a completion over expected god for most of the season. Most of the season, he led the league in that stat, and that is largely based off of completing passes that are tight window, tough throws. Like if you think about like what made Geno great this year, there was a lot of dimes where he just dropped it in a bucket from 30 or 40 yards or zipped it by. Like there were early in the season some wide open drop off kind of throws, but there weren't a lot of those, at least from my perspective. So I didn't see the scheme like making Geno this year. Did you guys, any of you feel, and this becomes really important for how much you're going to pay. So I'm just kind of curious. Jeff, what about you? Or Dayna, go ahead.
Oh no, it's fine. I mean, I was just going to say no. You get a feeling that, and I've talked to a couple people who have said this, and they said it to me at the beginning of the season, and I kind of laughed at them. But they're like, no, Geno was talented when he has, some playmakers around him. I'm like, well, you could say that about anybody. I just kind of blew it off. But it's true. I think that Geno deserves a lot of credit. He sat there. He learned exactly what Seattle liked to do for all those years sitting behind Russell. And he learned what worked and what didn't for Russell. And I think that he just, sat there and absorbed all that and then took the arm talent that he had and used it to his advantage for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, I could take us into a conversation about yet again what to pay Geno Smith, but we've talked about that so much and we will talk about it again, and we will not spend more time in this episode discussing it, although it's always tempting because that debate will rage on until that gets figured out. So let's turn our attention to free agency, which is what we said we were going to start by talking about. And before we get into this year's free agent crop, I wanted to ask you all, philosophically, how do you think about free agency from a team building perspective? And I'll give you a few examples. You can riff off of these or go off on your totally own direction. But for example, do you see it as a place to find foundation core players that are long-term starters for you? Is it a place you look to find blue chip players? Is it a place you look to find complementary players? Is it a place you look to find stop gaps, 1 or 2 year kind of guys that just fill a hole? How do you think about free agency? And I'm not talking about your own guys. I'm talking about bringing in new guys to the team. And Jeff, I wanted to start with you on that question.
Yeah, I think from a team building standpoint, I don't believe it's a place you should be looking for blue chip players. I think they tend not to hit the mark, and if they do, there's usually a reason for it. With the franchise tag, and you don't see a lot of superstars in the market. So I'm more of a believer in using it to complement the draft. I think a lot of the teams that go draft only or free agency only, the thing with the free agency only, it's sort of patching holes, and then eventually the band, the Tim Ruskell end of the Tim Ruskell era, they went heavy on building free agency, and then 2 years later, all of a sudden you're old and slow, like Tampa Bay. You saw what happened with Tampa. They got old real quick. So I'm not a believer in building through free agency. I think you have to supplement. But I think of looking at the teams that are still playing, I think there's been a lot of examples where you can't just use the draft as your only form of acquisition. So Cincinnati did DJ Reader, Mike Hilton, and Trey Hendrickson the last 2 years to pair with those good drafts. Philadelphia got Hassan Reddick last year, and they've had good success building. And then Kansas City has done a really good job where they've added a lot of veteran free agents over the years. And whether it's been Juju at receiver, or they have Carlos Dunlap on their defensive line. And I think it's a really good thing where you have to kind of pair both of the teams like Green Bay that have been draft only. They've kind of wasted the end of this Aaron Rodgers window. So I think it's really important that you're using both together, using both in tandem. And you saw with the Seahawks at the beginning of this era, the most of their core was built through the draft on defense, and they supplemented it with Averill and Bennett, and it really pushed that unit over the top. And that's core what's going on with Cincinnati right now. So I think you have to use both, and that's more of a thing that's becoming prominent. But I wouldn't be searching for core players there. I think it has to be supplemental.
I love a lot of that. Nathan, before I throw it to you, I have to bring up, you talked about Cliff Averill and Michael Bennett. Those were both the best things that could have happened to the Seahawks and the worst. It's almost like a Geno Smith level thing where now it's everyone's we just need our Cliff Averill, Michael Bennett free agent signings. Those will never, ever happen again. People don't understand or forgot that was post-lockout. There was an absolute, or that was pre-lockout, actually, I think is what it was. There was a super depressed free agent market. People were not getting deals. Cliff Averill signed a 2-year, $13 million contract as someone who had like double-digit sacks for many years with Detroit. Michael Bennett got signed in like the second or third week of free agency. Maybe it was like the second wave, I should say, second or third wave of free agency at 1 year, $4.8 million, because he couldn't get his value and he just wanted to get back in the market. That will never happen again. We will never get players of that caliber for that cheap. That doesn't mean we won't get good players. Like Jeff brought up a lot of good examples. Trey Hendrickson was not signed for 1 year, $5 million, or anything close to that equivalent. So I don't believe that those types of deals are too frequent. But Nathan, I'm kind of curious, like you and I were talking before the show about how you're thinking about free agency. I'd be curious what you'd share now.
Yeah, I just don't get too excited about free agents anymore because, if you go back and look at all the guys that we talk about, I don't think many of them turn out to be really difference makers. There's two guys on the list this year, Robert Quinn and Yannick Ngakoue, that I think people were probably really excited about it 2-3 years ago whenever they were free agents. And, Quinn had I think one really good year, and then he's been kind of up and down, and Ngakwe's been okay, but he hasn't been this amazing guy that, people wanted to drop a dump truck of money on him. So I think the idea of it being supplemental, and I think the idea of finding, guys like Nwosu, right, who you don't make a big commitment to, but, have some upside and, can maybe be a nice contributor. But Nwosu is not a guy that you're going to build a defense around. He's a great guy to have as the fourth player on your defense. So I think that's how you have to look at free agency. And I think Jeff hit it on the head. And I've seen a lot of other people, I know Justice Mosqueda talks about this a lot, right? There's a reason these guys didn't get re-signed by their team for the most part. There's weird scenarios where the Cliff Averill thing was weird. Michael Bennett, I think he had an injury thing on top of it. And so they that was something that Seattle was willing to risk. But for the most part, teams have enough ability to keep the guys they want to keep that, these guys get out into the market for a reason.
Dayna, I went to the boys first because I think you have a different perspective on this. You talk about that there's a lot of talk about the draft, but you see the value in free agency. I'm curious how you think about it.
Well, I do. I think that I actually agree with a lot that Nathan and Jeff said. I think that it's not something you can build your whole team on. You just can't afford to do that, right? Especially with the way the money has been flowing the last couple of years. But then I always think about Cliff and Michael Bennett too, but I also think about Dwayne Brown, who came in, he wanted out of his team. That it wasn't that the team didn't want him necessarily. He wanted out. And I think that him coming to Seattle revitalized him for a couple of years. He was a fantastic player for a couple of years. So I think of more free agency, more like players like that. Even Dunlap, when he came to Kansas or to Seattle, he was so excited. And he's in Kansas City and playing well, but you can tell he's at the end of his career. So that's where I think of more of free agency. I'm not looking for a superstar. Now, would I sell the entire team for Myles Garrett? Yeah, I would. Sorry. I would send all the money to Cleveland to do that. But that's not logical. It's not, it's not something that's going to happen because, unless the player really wants out, then you have to trade for him in his $125 million contract. So no, that's not logical. But I just think those players that bring in a presence, they don't have to be the blue chip players. I think you find your blue chip players in the draft. I think that's where you find those pieces, but it's those players that can bring leadership, that bring a little strength to the position, whatever position it may be, and just bring kind of ground it a little bit. I don't really know how to explain it, although I see it in my head. It's like they come in and they fill the position. They're the smart vet. They're teaching some of these younger kids how to play better. And yet they do make an impact, not a Myles Garrett impact, but they do make an impact on the team. And I think free agency is really important for that. But I don't want to discount digging for some of those players that maybe are coming off an injury and people are a little worried about, or, you know, looking at those players that just, like I said, want out of their team, or their team is nowhere near contending and they want to go somewhere that is, and is willing to, they want a certain dollar amount, but is not willing to, you know, they're not trying to rob a bank.
Yeah. I think those are all great additions. I think the other piece here is, at least for me, the philosophy changes based on where you are in your building your roster process. And so, you know, when you're at a point like the 2012 Seahawks coming out of that season really were a pass rush away from being a Super Bowl like favorite. And so they went in knowing that they were going to go after the best pass rushers that they could get, period. And that makes a lot of sense in that situation. Even if you have to spend top dollar to do it, that makes sense. They're not in that situation this year. This is not a team that's like a player away or two players away, or even a position group away. So in these types of situations, I look at, first of all, where's their depth in the free agent market? Similar to how I look at the draft, where is there like a number of good players that are worth looking at? Because other teams that are desperate will spend money on the best of those players, but then you start filling up rosters, and then there's potentially some good guys left over for you to get at a more affordable rate. So that's one. Two, I do look at free agency to be a good stopgap, like an insurance policy. So in a situation where you do want to get younger and you do want to get better, but maybe the draft is thin, or maybe you don't want to just totally rely on only rookies to be in that position, then I think it's good to get stopgap veteran free agents at super affordable, super short contracts. Al Woods is a great example of something that can go really right, where you're getting a guy in his mid 30s and he's 1 year and he's $2.5 million or whatever they signed for initially. And he completely outpaid that contract. And the Seahawks have done that multiple times. Tony McDaniel was like that. I would even say Ataba Rubin was like that. Like, there've been a number. Colin Cole was kind of like that. So there's been some of those. Then there's also position groups that I trust more. I will never want the Seahawks to ever, at least as long as Pete and John are here, I don't want them ever sign a free agent corner ever again. Like, that's never worked. And so that's a position I'm not interested in. Positions that I do think are interesting, I think offensive line. If you look at the hit rate on offensive linemen in free agency, I think there's a lot more of those that you end up feeling good about. Not all of them, but a lot of them. I think defensive line is a little bit more variable, but I think it's also, especially defensive tackle, run stuffing defensive tackles tend to be pretty good. And then it gets a little more dicey after that. So like, I think there's a few positions I feel better about. And then there's others that I don't. Like wide receiver, I'm pretty sketchy about. I don't know if I want us to sign any free agent wide receivers. So, okay. I did look back at Seahawks free agent signings for the last decade. Does anyone remember that we signed Aldon Smith?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there's some interesting ones.
Totally
here.
Forgotten that. Forgotten it.
I go back and look at this list. I mean, there's names like Jason Jones, who was kind of a halfway contributor for a little bit as a defensive end. People might not remember him. There are guys like Breno Giacomini, who was a multiple year starter, right? He was helpful. Raheem Brock was a guy early on. He was a 10-sack guy for them, signed on a 1-year contract. But there's also the Matt Flynn's. There were guys like, I'm going to give you guys a trip down memory lane. Antoine Winfield, obviously that didn't work out. There was Clinton McDonald was an interesting one. Again, like lower price, second or third wave of free agency. He came back. Tony McDaniel, we talked about. Sidney Rice was a guy the team went out and spent a lot of money on. Kevin Williams, you may or may not remember. Eric Winston, you may or may not remember. Tony Moyaki. Like, there's not a lot. Like Fred Jackson, you look at some of these names, and Bradley Sowell, Jamarcus Webb. Like there's been a lot of variability to how much the team got out of what Jari Evans. So Luke Jokel. So I guess I look at the Seahawks free agency in general. We had Dwight Freeney on the team for some period of time. That is like crazy
He
to
was
me.
he was good too. He had like 3 sacks in 3 games and then they cut him. It was so weird.
You're right. That was like, yeah, DJ Fluker, Sebastian Janikowski, like the best special teams tackler of all time. Mike Upati. So Ziggy Ansah, a fan favorite. So, Jeff, knowing that you've looked at the free agent market, I want to start with you. Is there a position group? Is there names that jump to your head of your list of like, these are guys I think the Seahawks should really be thinking about?
Well, yeah, I think there's a couple. Some of them are by circumstance and some of them are just based on what the market's going to play. And usually I'm pretty against this one position. For what you were saying before, linebacker is a position that I really think is a position, off-ball linebacker is a position I would almost heavily go in the draft. You can get younger legs and get faster. But the Seahawks situation is super bleak right now. Brooks is coming off the ACL, and all of their other contributors at off-ball linebacker are free agents. Cody Barton, Tanner Muse is restricted, even John Radigan. So they're going into next year with Brooks, we don't know when he'll be ready, and then that's it. So my big fear is that they're going to re-sign Cody Barton, overpay him a little bit out of desperation, and we could argue all day about him. But looking at that position group, there's actually a lot of interesting guys, and I saw Brian put out a tweet about that, and when I went through like the list, there was a lot of names, which again, it's a position that historically doesn't get paid. So there's like a guy, Tremaine Edmonds in Buffalo, he's going to get big money. So Seattle should not look at him. But there's a group of like 30 and under level players that I think because of the position depth and free agency, you actually might be able to find a decent sweet spot. So there's a guy, Jermaine Pratt, who's been starting linebacker on the Bengals. David Long Jr., he's on the Titans. Alex Singleton on the Broncos. Bobby Okereke, who was on the Colts, who was drafted, I think, 1 pick where Barton was. One of those guys, I would much rather, or even Leighton Vander Esch, who's closer to 30, he's had some injuries. I think I rattled off a lot of names there, but I think there's a lot of names at a position that's historically isn't paid. I think you might be able to sort of find that value where Brian was talking about earlier with Averill and Bennett, where I would much rather kind of upgrade the spot, maybe pay 1 year $5 million, 1 year $4 million instead of bringing back Barton, because I don't think you can go into the draft with Brooks and Barton and that's it. I kind of hope they add a player that upgrades him and then add a draft pick, and hopefully Brooks can come back and then you have 3 linebackers that can compete for inside. So I wouldn't be surprised if they re-sign Barton because they'll be cheap, but I would rather look at one of those names because I think we talked about the front 7 talent all year. They're super bleak right now at inside linebacker. We said that last year when Brooks was healthy. So that's a pretty disastrous position. So it's good it kind of lines up with one of the few strengths of this free agent class.
I'm with you on that. And one of the other things John Schneider said today that was, I thought, a little bit revealing was, you saw the 49ers in that game. They were who we used to be. He said that. And he said they were fast, strong, and tough. And that's where we need to, he also said, we know what we need to do. And that game just reinforced it. Now we just got to go do it. It's hard for me to imagine he's going to look at Cody Barton and say he's fast, strong, and tough. Like that's part of the solution. I know that there's a good reason. I think they may like John Radigan more than people realize. They might try to give him a chance, but I don't see any way that the Seahawks do not sign, that they go into the draft without signing additional veteran outside the organization inside linebackers. And I think that there's a lot of good ones to choose from. You mentioned some of them. I think Alex Singleton, to me, like played on a $1.5 million contract this year for Denver. He had a rep of being only a run stopper. God forbid we only had a run stopper at linebacker at this point, but he played well in coverage this year. He's going to get more than that. He's 30 years old, but so he's not going to get a huge contract. I think he's interesting. And, Azeez Al-Shire, the 49ers linebacker, is going to be a free agent. there's some interesting. I think David Long is one that I definitely have my eyes on. I think Jermaine Pratt will end up getting probably more money than the Seahawks are willing to spend. He would be amazing, but David Long is he is a really good run stopping linebacker that also is athletic and fast, and I think might be an interesting fit for them. So that's one I have my eye on. Nathan, is there a position group where you're looking at it also could relate to the draft, where you're seeing weakness in the draft and you think they should look to solve in free agency or have some veteran support? Given that you have some hesitation on the free agent front and what that can mean, are there places you feel more comfortable?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's linebacker. I agree. I don't know that they're going to be as down on Cody Barton as everyone else is, but you also have to take into into account Jordan Brooks's injury. So I don't know if it'll be a bigger ticket guy like David Long, but that seems like it's the spot that makes the most sense, right? Like, I don't know, just kind of running through some of these, like edge rusher. I don't know that there's anyone there that's like really exciting and fits what they want to do. Maybe some like I think it's going to be mostly a lot of these filler type guys. Uchenna Nwosu type signings at the biggest. But yeah, there's nothing here that really like jumps out to me as like, oh yeah, that's a great fit, or that's the guy that's gonna like, they really could plug him in and he could take that, he could really help them. I just don't see that outside of really that linebacker spot.
Yeah, I mean, really quickly talking about edge as free agent market, I'm gonna run down not all these names, but just a few of them. This is like you're talking about Robert Quinn, who's 33, Yannick Ngakoue, who I think is actually a decent comp for Darrell Taylor, pass rusher that can't stop the run. I'm not sure you need another one of those.
And you're gonna you'd be putting him in front of Darrell Taylor, in front of Mafe, and potentially in front of a Will Anderson or whoever else you might draft to play that spot.
Miles Murphy, or there's a bunch of edge. There's like edge is the deepest part of this draft. I think it would be a big mistake. Other names here: Jadeveon Clowney, Samson Ebukam, Arden Key, Melvin Ingram, who's like 75, Justin Houston, who's like 85. Marcus Davenport's interesting, but I think will be way overpriced. Bring back
the dynamic duo of Rasheem Green and Carlos Dunlap.
Yeah, I mean,
honestly, this is funny considering my reaction at the time, but I think the one I'm most interested in on the edge list is Bruce.
Interesting. Well, I mean, I get it. I mean, Charles, like there's like complementary guys. I don't think that they need a complementary. They have complementary
they
edge
finally
guys.
have those guys. Like I wrote about it in the article today. Like they have finally three like 27 all ascending players at edge. They have Nwosu, they have Mafe, and then they have Taylor. Really, all they need is like the draft pick in there. There's no reason to spend there. The defensive tackle or the 3-4 end type. Maybe you look at that. But edge, it seems like they finally, like how many years have we ripped on them for their idiotic handling of that position? They finally have a sustainable thing going here, which is nice. Because every year they were like, oh, we're going to go with Benson Mayo this year. Like, we figured it out. We're going to try to get Clowney back. And if we don't, we're going to panic.
Remember when Benson Mayo was the next Chris Clemens, according to John? Yeah.
There are some interesting, there's at least a couple names here that are sticking out to me as second draft type guys where, you take a shot at a guy that didn't work out on his rookie contract, but, you thought he was interesting as a prospect. Maybe you give him a better situation, use him differently. So like, I don't know if Chase Winovich, did he get traded or did he actually hit the market already? But he's still youngish. Ben Banagoo is a guy, he came out the same year as LJ Collier. So these are, guys that you could pick up and, if you wanted something other than Daryl Johnson or something like that, right? Or Bruce, if you're looking at a younger upside play.
Yeah. Well, the other person that John mentioned was Tyreek Smith, who was part of the draft class and spent the year on IR, and they are fond of as an edge player. So he's going to get a shot. it is hard for me, Dayna, to imagine that they're going to sign any edge free agents. I think that that's a position they'll look at in the draft. It's so deep there. It feels like it would be a bad place to invest.
Agreed. I think that that's not the logical spot. Linebacker really is a logical spot. What I'm hoping that they don't do outside of center is look at any free agents on the offensive side of the ball. Like, I don't want a free agent wide receiver. I don't want, I think our line for the question marks that it had toward the end of the season actually is fine. I don't think that they need to look at that. The only really, I think that the players that they'll probably pick up maybe on that is their own players, but it just makes more sense on defense. And where do you need it on defense? You need it in linebacker. But the draft, I mean, everywhere you look, when you read about the draft, it's all about, the edge rushers. So I don't think that they'll bother with that. And I love that you gave the little nod to Bruce, Nathan, because here's the interesting thing. Think about the impact that Bruce had and he's in his late 30s and came in. I mean, it wasn't a huge impact, it was good. So what if you had someone who wasn't in their late 30s and someone who actually could just do just this little bit better, but maybe is more raw? I think that they'll be able to find that in the draft. I don't think that they'll need to go pay anybody for that.
I think that the interesting, it came up in the early Seahawks where guys like Chris Clemens and
God, I miss Chris Clemens.
They would get so frustrated about how everyone would get excited about the rookies, and they're like, these guys don't know how to play yet. Give me veterans, know what gap they're supposed to be in, know how to play. And when we had those younger players, Frank Clark learned to rush behind Cliff Averill and Michael Bennett, and some of those people had people like Darrell Taylor has who to learn from on this team about pass rushing, like nobody. So I do think bringing in someone like that would be great. I just don't know that makes sense this time. I mean, the other two areas that are interesting to me free agency wise are guard, offensive guard, and defensive tackle. Those are the two spots for me that are worth talking about. I don't know. And Jeff, I don't know, cap cuts on the offensive guard side. There might be some, I think Tampa might have somebody that's interesting if I'm remembering right, but I haven't dug in deeply on the guard market, but John Feliciano, Trey Turner at one point was like an interesting guard. He's really crashed and burned in Washington, but he might be interesting. There's a decent,
we have an old friend on this list, Ode Abushi. Bring him home.
I don't know. Jeff and I could finally get Will Hernandez on the Seahawks. That he's only how old is he now? He's only 28, but I don't know. That might be a spot. Nate Davis is kind of an interesting name. Play with the Titans, a mauler kind of guy. So that might be a spot. David Edwards for the Rams had some years, but he's super young, but has been pretty shitty too. So I don't know. Is there anyone on the guard market that interests you, Jeff?
Not right now. Not really. You got to hope that there's a cap cut. It's kind of a thin market. There's not even good guys with flyers. So I think Sumalo on the Eagles, his contract's going to void. He's a really good player, but I think it'll cost a lot. But Seattle needs it's not a talked about weakness, but right guard was a huge problem area for them this year. And Gabe Jackson's going to get cut. His salary is $11.2 million. That clears out $7 or $6 million. So Phil Haynes a free agent, so they got to do something there. So what I probably expect is they'll probably just sign Haynes to a cheaper deal as a hedge and then go into the draft. But it's a really weak free agent crop. Guard and receiver are the two weakest part on the market.
Yeah, I agree.
What's the story with Laurent Duvernay-Tardif? He was a quality player for Kansas City just a couple years ago, right? But
yeah, he went to go be a doctor.
He's a Canadian guy. He took a couple years off to be a doctor during COVID, and he has not been the same kind of physical player since he played a bit with the Jets last year. But you take a couple years off.
I don't think his heart is in it. I think he was in it, just to kind of get him through school. And yeah, his heart just doesn't seem to be in it at this point. So I have a question for you guys about this, though.
Yeah.
So I mentioned center because you guys always bitch and moan about the centers, which fair enough, understandably, totally get it. I'm not finding much in the center market, to be quite honest with you, in free agency. But is that something that's even worth looking into? And would that then improve the guard play? Because guard is so questionable.
Nathan looks so excited.
Oh,
Well,
look
Can
at
you
him.
answer that question?
He looks so
Dayna.
happy.
Did you know?
Well,
I think I don't
I
know
know
at the end of the season, but one of PFF's, I think, like top 3 centers is a free agent and should be affordable. And he is
Do
a
you say-
hometown.
Ethan Posick, I'm going to punch you in the head.
Bring him home.
No!
Bring him home. Bring him
That's
back.
good.
Resurrect Rashad Penny. Fix Kenneth Walker. Get this run game going again. Bring back Ethan Posick.
I'm
It's
gonna
not
skip
great.
that.
Yeah.
They're going to sign Blythe.
I think there's a really good chance of that. Look, I think that Fuller, they're not going to rely on Kyle Fuller. Blythe is an unrestricted free agent. I don't think they'll go into the draft with no centers on the roster that they're comfortable with. So I think it's highly likely that they're going to get some vet, and Blythe is the most likely. The question is how much they commit to him, and hopefully it's not much. But he's not part of getting bigger, stronger, tougher. Bigger, faster, tougher. Like he's just not. And I just hope they really they're really thinking about that and not just saying that, because they do need to do all of those things, and mainly the bigger and the tougher. And middle of that line was mushy.
Out of curiosity, can anyone name the Niners starting center?
Isn't he like a rookie?
He's a free agent. He's a free agent this year. I remember reading that. I can't remember his name.
Is it
Daniel Brunskill?
Oh yeah. I thought he played guard, but no, maybe he...
Brendel.
Oh, Jake Brendel.
Yeah.
Jake Brendel, yeah.
He's a free agent.
Is he bigger, stronger, faster? I mean,
Does he fit the criteria?
I'm just saying, if the Niners are they're the Monstars, like I don't know, are they Monstars at center? I don't think a lot of teams are like that there.
No, I just, well, one, I don't think the 49ers are a good example of an offensive line outside of Trent Williams that you're wanting to emulate. I just think there's so many good there's good centers to be had in this draft. So that's what I'd love to see, but they've never done it. So who knows? I do, just from a time perspective, I want to switch gears for a second. I want to talk about a couple other positions, and we'll get to Patreon questions. I will say that there's a couple positions that are interesting to me here. One is Nathan's favorite. I think running back is something that there's actually quite a few names that could be interesting. I don't know what Donta Foreman will get, if he'll get like featured back money. I think he played really well for the Panthers. He's
no chance.
I don't think so, right? Depending on what
that position group, it's loaded.
It's loaded. It really is. There's a lot of good names. I'd be fine with Rashad Penny coming back. I don't know that you can just totally rely on it, but he should be super cheap and on a short-term deal. Jamal Williams is like there's a lot of names that are interesting there. I wouldn't be surprised if the Seahawks nab. I would rather them pay a few million for a rotational running back than spend one of their draft picks on a running back. Is my personal, I'd rather not sink a draft pick.
You know what I would pay money to see?
What's that?
Nathan's reaction if Seattle picks up Saquon Barkley. I just want to watch it. I just want to watch it like a little camera in the corner, and he'll be all like this, stoic, but seething inside, and it would be hilarious. It would make me real happy, Nathan.
I would be seething with him. That would be
I know. Oh, I would be too, but I'm just saying it would be.
It would be funny.
It'd be a hell of a lot better than drafting Kenneth Walker last year.
You say the weirdest shit sometimes.
I am way more in favor of blowing some cap space. Again, I'm not a big fan of free agents, so I don't think you need to save all this to go get your big star or whatever. So yeah, give Saquon Barkley, I don't know, whatever he's gonna make. What, I don't even know. If they give him 20 million, I'd freak out about that. But and yeah, use your high draft picks on actual positions of value. I think that's better.
We will not spend any time here in free agency, but there are some interesting safeties. And if we didn't have as much money as we have spent there, and if we got rid of some of those guys, There's some interesting names there. I don't think the Seahawks will go there. And then
I don't know. I mean, can they not go there? Do they roll it back? Because I think that they should assume that, best case is probably Jamal on the pup to start the season.
Sounds like it.
So they're just gonna roll again with Diggs and Neal and Jonathan Abram, maybe.
Well, he's an unrestricted free agent, I think. So
I don't know. Like, again, there are some. I don't know that Juan. Dana, you could tell me here how Juan Thornhill has performed. I don't think he's been stellar, has he?
He's inconsistent, but he has some pretty good moments. Yeah,
So
he has some good moments.
Yeah, is he a guy that kind of might slip through and a guy you could snag, or again, some of these kind of second draftish type guys? I think they're gonna have
probably
to get somebody.
With some of the other names that are out there for safety. Yeah, I could see where here, but I would be shocked if Kansas City didn't bring him back, but because he has played well for them at the end. But yeah, he's pretty inconsistent. So.
Yeah, I mean, guys like Tayshaun Gibson, who are older and will be super cheap, but have been pretty impactful and playmakers for like the 49ers. I think there's a lot of interesting names on the safety market. Top of the market has some really interesting names, but they're not going to go there. The last position I would just call out is interior defensive line. So we know that they've got to get going there. There's a fair number of names that are interesting there. Jeff, you talked about some of them. One of the ones that you brought up that I like is Greg Gaines from the Rams, former Husky, definitely more of a run stuffer, but has some pass rush in him and he's definitely a rotational guy, not going to get top of the market kind of money. I also think Zach Allen's an interesting name. I don't know fit scheme wise, but he's been pretty disruptive, and I think is the type of guy that could be an interesting fit for the Seahawks. But there's a fair, I mean, you can go down to like in that Lions Packers game, the best defensive player on the Lions arguably was Isaiah Buggs, who is their nose tackle. He was shit for most of that season. They gave up a ton of rushing yards, but he was moving people all over the field. He's a free agent. So like there's a lot of guys on that defensive tackle market that it feels like it would be wise for the Seahawks to invest in. Is that how you see it, Jeff?
Yeah, and the thing was, when I dove a little deeper, the Seahawks have only 4 players, like interior defensive line or 3-4 defensive linemen that are under contract. And one of them is Brian Monet, who's got a bad injury. And the other 3 are guys that have like clear big cap savings if you cut them. So Shelby Harris is like $12 million, and I think they save $9 million if they cut him. Quinton Jefferson is like $6.6 million. They save like $4.6 million if they cut him. And the same is for Al Woods, who's like $5.4 million. They'd save like $3.8 million if they cut him. So I think they're going to transform this group, especially that Pete pointed out. I think that's an area, if you need to create money, like all 4 of them, you can axe them all. And Jefferson's a guy like KJ Wright's talked about, hasn't fit the scheme. So that is a spot where I think they should go into free agency. Draft is not a position where you're getting a lot of like proven defensive tackles to go up against these San Francisco guys. Like, so someone like Zach Allen, or I think Gaines is a really good fit for them. He's played in this defense. They run the same defense in this system here. And I think he's like the perfect free agent for them. I think Dramont Jones from Denver, he's going to cost a lot, but I think he's a guy they should definitely look at investing in. But like they have so little uncertainty at that spot, given that Harris has such a big cap number. Woods is 35 years old. They need to basically transform the entire group. So they're going to need to use free agency, especially of how bad they were at run defense. So the money will be there. It's just a matter of what they can do. And I think they need to make big investments there.
Deron Payne is a guy that a lot of people have talked about. I just don't see that he's top of the free agent market for across the free agent market. He'll be a top 5 free agent, probably, like not exclude.
I think he'd be number 1. Yeah.
But like he's going to get paid. I don't know that makes sense for the Seahawks to go off. And he's a good player. I don't think he's a player that I would want, even if they got excited about. I don't think I want them to sink top of the market free agent money in. Did anyone feel
definitely a bigger, tougher guy though?
He is 100%. He fits that bill. That much money feels like he's gonna get what, like
$18 million.
17, something like.
I think 18. I think the tag's around $18 million.
Yeah,
And then they'll franchise tag him. Carson Wentz's contract, I think, clears like $20 million, so that essentially pays for a pain.
All right.
One thing we should talk about here
okay.
is Puna gone? Do we see Puna play his last game in a Seahawks uniform?
Well, he is an unrestricted free agent.
I think so.
That's kind of sad.
I don't know that it is. I mean, maybe, I guess, but
sad. Maybe that is sad, or that
no, that he's gone. No,
Oh.
it is sad. I like Puna 4 too. You guys know I like that. Every time you guys would bring it up, I'd cringe a little about him leaving. But yeah, I don't think this was his strongest year, so they might dump him. But I think a lot of the cap stuff and who they keep and don't really, and we'll talk about this at length until it happens, but really comes down to if they can restructure Jamal Adams' contract. So, which they will.
I have to tell you before we go into Patreon questions, without giving all the detail, I just got a text from my wife. If anyone was wondering about my reaction on air there, she's doing a webinar right now as well for work, and they got Zoom bombed. And I wish I could tell you what was on the screen. Oh my God. Zoom bombing. That would be, I have to admit, when I'm bored next time, instead of going and getting like cookies, maybe I'll just try to like Zoom bomb random things and start talking Seahawks and see how that goes. That would be maybe be more entertaining. Okay. So let's switch over to Patreon questions. We've been at this already an hour. We should definitely get into those. There's a lot of good ones tonight. If you haven't already, please give the show a like. Thumbs up. Appreciate it. Smash the like button, all those good things. Subscribe to the channel. Give us a 5-star rating on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, any place you're listening to the podcast. Let us know why, and we'd love to hear about it. And then go to patreon.com/hawkblogger, sign up, get immediate access to the Slack channel. It is the best place to be for the offseason. Constant conversation about what's going on. High quality of conversation. Not a lot of crap you have to wade through. You don't have to get 49ers crap in there or other stuff you don't want to see. It's all Seahawks football plus Mariners talk and some other stuff. I think there's probably a Kraken channel that I don't involve myself in, but that's okay. So go there, patreon.com/hawkblogger, sign up now, and all the proceeds go to charity. So that's a great thing as well. Dayna, what questions are we going to answer tonight?
Well, the first question is from Zach, and he said, should Seattle go after a big ticket defensive line option free agency in addition to drafting? And we think we've already kind of covered that, so that's good. Then Braxton has, in a previous presser, Schneider discussed contract negotiations and said that there's a number they've expressed to Gino's camp that they won't surpass. What is the maximum price per year that you'd give Gino? And I know that you said you didn't really want to talk about this, but Brian, just give the number. What's your number?
The maximum for me is right around 30 million. Mm-hmm. I think that there's been fair things brought up this week about why it's going to be 35. There's been, I think, valid reasons, and I'm more on this camp, why Seahawks, if they wanted to play hardball, could potentially get him for under 30. So I think realistically, he'll probably come in right around 30.
Mm-hmm. Would you be mad at that?
No. I'd be mad if they get much over that. As much as I like Gino, ultimately, I think people are underestimating how stupid NFL GMs and coaches are in a lot of cases, and how much of a stigma there is with being a backup for that many years and being kind of the butt of jokes. And then for these guys that literally have to bet their livelihoods, go in a press conference in front of the whole world and all their fan base and say, this is the guy that we're going to spend $35-40 million a year on, and he's going to win us a Super Bowl. I just think there's a very small list of guys that have the guts to do that. Mm-hmm. So I think his market's going to be softer than maybe he or his agent realize.
It's fair. All right. Jason A, he says, we talked about this quite a bit. Which positions for Which position or position should be shored up by a low-cost, high-value free agency addition as a hedge against being forced to reach in the draft? I think we covered that one pretty well too, don't you think? I think that was pretty good. Thank you, Jason, for the question. Let's see. Oh, I'm going to give this one to Jeff because I think I'm going to like his answer better than I would like Nathan's answer. So, question, I think it's actually is what the name is. If Desai gets hired by another team, do you infer any kind of friction between him and Pete? I.e., the assistant head coach title seems to indicate he was going to be long-term, but leaving after 1 year. And the second part is, who would you hire to take his place? They said their choice is Marquand Manuel.
Yeah, I don't think that Desai leaving would indicate any friction. I think if he's leaving, it's a clear promotion. He's had a ton of defensive coordinator interviews. Even before the Seahawks hired him, he had like 3 or 4 last year, and he's into 2 more jobs now. He didn't get the Cleveland job, but Miami, Minnesota. So I think probably pay wise and probably just in terms of career growth, it's a clear step forward than being the assistant head coach. I don't know why that is, but defensive coordinators do make more money. Who I would like, it's a weird spot where like they don't necessarily need to fill that spot. It's more of like a luxury spot on a coaching staff where they tried to hire Ed Donatel, who was a disaster running the same defense with Minnesota. So I don't know if that's the guy you want to bring in to say, here's the veteran voice we need to run this defense, when he couldn't quite do it himself. So it's more of a luxury spot. They have Carl Scott, who's the emerging defensive backs coach. They have Clint Hurtt. I'd probably rather like a veteran coach who's called the defense to help Clint Hurtt. But again, I don't see a lot of like friction. It's Desai's on a path. He wants to be a head coach. I think that's the next back jump in to be a defensive coordinator.
Now,
One thing
Nathan, go ahead.
Sorry, I want to jump in really quick to continue. There's one thing related to the question you asked me, Dayna, that I think is a misnomer out there for a lot of fans. A lot are like, what are you talking about Geno at 30 million? There's no way he's worth that. He should get 20 million or like 18 million or whatever. I just want to quickly run through the quarterbacks' salaries. So Derek Carr, who Geno was better than this year, 40 million a year. Matt Stafford, who Geno is better than by a long way this year, 40 million a year. Dak Prescott, who is pretty much equivalent to Geno, 40 million a year. Then it goes down to Kirk Cousins, 35 million. Then it goes to Jared Goff, 33.5 million. Carson Wentz got 32 million this year. Matt Ryan at 38 got 30 million this year. Ryan Tannehill at 35 got 30 million this year. So I think people just don't really understand how much quarterbacks in this level are getting paid. He was a legitimate Pro Bowl quarterback. 30 million would be a pretty good deal if the Seahawks got him for that. But I just wanted people to have a little more context. Like the guy's getting paid 20 million. You know, you're talking about like Marcus Mariota and, you know, I don't know. You get into rookies essentially at that point. So backup quarterbacks, and he's not going to get a backup deal.
Yeah, that's just what they cost. That's just what they are. So,
yeah.
All right, Nathan, this next one is for you. It's from Robin. It says, Patron question, why is Pete so stuck on this defensive scheme? Are there any teams in the last few years that are running it successfully? And then she wrote, admittedly, I know nothing about defensive schemes.
Yeah, I mean, it got Brandon Staley a head coaching job. It got Vic Fangio a head coaching job. I think I think there's a couple things. I think we're probably getting to a point now where it's been in the league long enough that there are adjustments to it. And so it may not be quite the dominant thing. It does feel like they're chasing a trend a little bit, but I think Pete talked about this in his presser, right? That he doesn't want to have the Fangio defense. This is still going to be their defense, right? So I don't know that he's stuck on a scheme right now. It still feels like a team and a defense that's very much in transition and figuring out. And it feels like Pete's trying to take some good ideas from the meta right now and, meld in his 103 years of experience in the sport which we saw worked great sometimes and not so great sometimes. And so I think you can be pretty optimistic about it and say, they're figuring it out, they're learning, they're still not a super talented team, and give it a year or so, and maybe the staff can come up with something that's the next, Fangio, the next Cover 3, the next Tampa 2, right? Like, these things come and go all the time, and they're a little behind it right now, but it seems like they're trying to be creative about it and maybe create, the next fad
that everyone will copy. That's right.
Exactly.
All right. So Mark asked a question about what Seahawks should do at interior linebacker. We talked about that quite a bit, I think. And then, Brian, I'm going to give this one to you. Mark also asked, would there be any trade interest for Jamal Adams now? Should they trade Diggs instead and draft a free safety with a high pick?
I don't think there'd be any trade interest for Jamal Adams. They talked about his injury being serious enough that he is going to be still rehabbing all the way up into camp. So to Nathan's point, he might be a PUP guy. Like, people aren't going to trade for a hurt guy.
Mm-mm.
And so I think Jamal's here most likely. And people are just going to have to hope that not plan on him and hope that he's a positive. That's, I think, where it is with Jamal.
I think people should be ready for Jamal Adams to not play next year. I don't know if that's going to happen.
Like, due to injury, or because he'll get cut, or
no injury. Like, he could just end up going from PUP to IR or just not playing at all. I mean, like, IR right away. I don't know. Like, it's not for sure, right? But people should be ready for him to not play a snap of football next season.
His injury was pretty severe. That is true.
It's an injury that has ended careers in the past. Hopefully, he's getting good medical treatment and recovering, and he's young and all that. But yeah, I mean, I think it's very realistic that he doesn't. It seems most likely that he'll at least miss 6 to 8 some weeks. He may not play at all, or he may come back, but it's kind of a Trey Brown situation where he takes a long time and kind of never really gets on the field, because he's still working through it.
It's fair. All right. Jeff, this is from Zach. What is your over under on starting defensive players at the end of this year, starting for us next year, week 1? He says it's 7 in his opinion.
7 seems high. I'm going to go under on 7.
Yeah.
So let's see. Woolen, Diggs, probably Ryan Neal based on what Nathan just said. So what's that? Mike Jackson, probably. So probably the whole secondary comes back.
Yeah.
Woods, Harris.
I think Harris will be back.
Different deal.
Is he starting? Yeah. And then Nwosu, Bruce Irvin was starting, so not him. Yeah, I think it's going to be like 5-6 guys.
Yeah.
I'm going to go under 7. I think they're going to transform a lot of that front. And I think that you'll see a lot of the secondary back because of linebacker. You might see none back. And then outside of Chenna, I think they're going to turn over a lot.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go under.
All right, Nathan. Perry wants to know any defensive line vet cap casualties you could see us picking up, like a Grady Jarrett or a Cam Jordan, and who would your dream pickup be? Again, feel free to say Myles Garrett, because I'm just going to keep saying that until it happens. Just so you know.
So I think they will find somebody. I don't know what like a Greg Gaines is going to go for. I'm just looking through the list here. Sheldon Rankins, maybe. I don't think that really feels right. I mean, it'll be somebody in this Al Woods.
Shy Tuttle.
Huh?
Shy Tuttle's.
Sure, I don't really know a lot about Shy Tuttle.
He's more of a pass rusher.
Okay. Yeah, I think more like the run stuffer that they've gone out and they've been finding for Taba Rubens and all these type, Jordan Phillips, maybe. I don't know, one of those guys.
All right. So Braxton wants.
Sorry, what? I don't have my heart set on anybody. That's for sure.
No. Yeah. Me neither. Just kidding. All right. So Braxton says, give us your hottest 2023 draft takes. I think that we're going to talk about the draft a lot over the next couple of weeks. So you'll probably hear a lot of those, Braxton. Then let's see. Oh, Brian, this one's for you. This is from Mark. Keeping all the hate aside, would Seahawks signing Brady for a year be really such a bad thing? Brady with K9, DK, Lockett, and a few capable tight ends is just what he had with Tampa. Nobody better to play Pete ball. No long-term commitment with a short contract. Draft a quarterback next year. And go.
Two things. One, we didn't answer Braxton's question, but keep an eye out on hawkblogger.com tomorrow. He wrote a great article that is going to be out there for everyone to see. He's been a great contributor to the Slack channel as well. So keep an eye out on that. Then on the Brady, I don't have like the Tom Brady hate thing. I was tired of the Patriots always winning, and it went from frustration to just like begrudging respect for how friggin' good he is. So I'm not like if it was Aaron Rodgers, I don't want to watch him play. I don't want him to be my quarterback. If Tom Brady was the guy, I can think of worse things. I just don't think Tom Brady has any interest in coming to the Seahawks. I think the Seahawks are not a quarterback away from contending. Geno just makes a lot more sense. He's already established. He's already a leader in the locker room, has more years left to play, and should be at a price point that you can still build some other guys around him. So, yeah, I don't think that there's going to be any chance of that happening. The alternatives would more likely be like the Jimmy Garoppolos of the world, as opposed to the Tom Brady's.
We didn't talk at all about Lamar Jackson. We talked a lot about free agents. Never talked about quarterbacks. I mean, does anyone have interest in Lamar Jackson? I mean, we're talking about spending $30 million on Geno. Lamar is going to be a lot more, but is like, if you're going to go that high for Geno, would you rather go 40, 45, whatever for Lamar?
No, the answer is absolutely not for me. Yeah, go ahead, Dayna.
No, my answer is no, too. I have no interest in doing that. First of all, I think it would have to be a longer term deal. And then it would be, he's young, but he's always hurt. And I don't think Lamar Jackson being a true free agent is a possibility. I think that the Ravens will probably tag him. And that makes the most sense if they can't get something done. Otherwise, let other teams fight over that contract, because he obviously wants Deshaun Watson level money. And I have no interest in Seattle spending that on a quarterback with the way the rest of the team is.
Yeah, if the defense was a little better and they were at a different point in their building, I could be really convinced into that. Just because a guy like Lamar is so hard to get, but to put themselves where you're going to have to spend like $40 to $50 million, give up 2 first round. He's going to cost 2 first round picks if he's tagged or if he's traded. So they're just at a point where they have so many holes. They'll basically be back where they were with Russell Wilson, with just a one better rookie class and a couple draft picks. I think if they had a defense in place, I would be all for it, but they're just not there.
Yeah.
Somebody in the chat said that Lamar is aged. I believe he will be 26. He just turned 26.
He's 27. Oh, he's 26. I'm like, he's a baby
26, still. January 7th. Yeah.
So he's coming off his rookie contract. He's prime age.
Yeah, reflect son, I love you, but no, Lamar is not aged.
Right. All right, I'm going to answer this next one. This question is from KDB, because I think a lot of people need to know this, and it's not necessarily about football. She wants to know why there are so many posts from Niners fans in her feed. She doesn't follow any of them. The Twitter gods are torturing him. Okay, so look at your Twitter, honey. Katie, look at your Twitter screen. The top, it's going to say for you, and the other one's going to say following. Ignore your for you page, hit following all of your normal people, and we'll be there, and all of those other people will go away. Okay, there you go.
Even better advice. I think if you click like your profile picture and then you go down and you hit the log out button, problem solved.
Well, that's what Nathan did. It's true. It's fair. That's a fair thing.
Nathan's
All right.
had the healthiest Twitter usage of all of us.
What?
It's been great. It's been great. I'm legitimately enjoying it. It's hard to keep up on the news, but otherwise, highly recommend.
All right. So this is from D. Crockett. Nathan, I'm sending this one to you. Will the team consider moving Curhan inside to guard full time? And his second question is, assuming Gino resigns and let's say Big Four, Young, Stroud, Levi, and Richardson are all off the board at 5, what other quarterback prospects would you like them to look at in later picks?
Well, I've already professed my Stetson Bennett love, so I will keep writing that. Yeah, I don't have any other kind of mid-round guys yet that I've fallen in love with, but I do think, I don't know, it'd be interesting just to take a shot on Stetson Bennett. So the question though was, what was the other question? What was for?
Will the team consider
Curhan.
moving Curran inside? Mm-hmm.
I would think so. I'm sure they already have. Haven't he already? He's kind of played both already, right?
Played guard at times. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to say he's been worse as a guard, which is a little unexpected. But yeah, I mean, I think he'll continue to be a guy that they just kind of use all over the place, barring him turning into something pretty impressive. I mean, he should get a good shot at right guard. You would think he'd be in the competition for that this offseason. Yeah, I think they'll give him a try anywhere.
Okay, Brian, I'm going to give you these next two questions together because they go together. So the first one's from Alexander, and he says, is Brock Purdy actually bad, or are we just Seahawks fans just salty? And then Jay Brandt says, how do the Eagles beat the Niners, and why is it because Brock Purdy isn't good enough?
Look, I wish I had better news for you, Seahawks fans. I think Brock Purdy is pretty good. And I think there's all sorts of people with different priors that they're trying to confirm. I don't have any of those in this case. Like, I wish I could tell you a strong story where I thought like Brock Purdy is poised to fall on his face. I've seen other quarterbacks for the 49ers under Shanahan. I've seen Nick Mullins. I've seen there's been guys that have gone through there that have played better under. I'm a huge Shanahan fan. So I do believe that he makes it easier on the quarterbacks. But Purdy just hasn't had a lot of turnover-worthy plays for the most part. And he has been pretty accurate. He's been pretty resourceful. He has played well in tough situations where, backed up at the goal line and third downs. I think he's generally been pretty good. So I think, barring injury, I think the 49ers have their quarterback for a while. That's my current point of view. I would love to learn something different, but that's my point of view. I do think that the Eagles represent maybe the best chance to beat the 49ers, especially if Patrick Mahomes is going to be hobbled and he's not able to play in the Super Bowl, since they already beat the 49ers pretty badly. But with that defensive line, the pass rush that they have there, and their coverage, their corners, I think there's a decent chance that the Eagles could find their way to win that game. But I don't think Purdy is a huge liability. I wish he was.
All right. This is the last one. I'm going to give this one to Jeff. This is a good one for Jeff. If you could create a realistic trade for one player, who would it be? And what would the compensation for both players in either contract?
The Seahawks trading for a player, or the Seahawks trading away a player?
It says trading for a player.
Okay. I would give up one of the second round picks for Vita Vea. I think there's no player that the Seahawks could use more than that guy. Locally, pretty famous guy here, but just in terms of getting bigger, stronger, a guy who completely changes the look of a defense. You could go years where you couldn't run the ball on Tampa Bay, and they've switched to defensive tackles. And I don't like giving up second round picks, and I don't like paying guys that much, trading for guys to pay defensive players. But to me, the exact kind of guy they need, the guy who impacts the way things are blocked. Obviously, another edge rusher like Myles Garrett would have been a fun answer for Dayna. But I think Vita Vea, if they want to be the team they want to be, having a guy like that where you don't need 35-year-old Al Woods and you don't need to be figuring out who your defensive tackle is every year, a guy like that just changes. Like when they went to the Super Bowl, no one could run on them for an entire season. And he's a pass rusher. He can toss guys around. And like, if you want to be that team to go up and play San Francisco, put a guy like that on your defense. So that would be my answer. I haven't thought about it much. I would like to trade for Deebo Samuel as well and not pay an expensive cost. But yeah, I think that's my answer.
I'd be real happy with Vita Vea too, not gonna lie.
What would you trade for Jalen Ramsey?
Now I read something. They might not have to trade for. Are they on the block? Did they? You think they're gonna get rid of him?
There's been rumblings. They're very top heavy. They don't have a lot of draft picks.
Would you give up 20 for Jalen Ramsey?
No way.
No?
Oh, come
No
on. The content.
way.
Jalen and DK on the same team. Come on. You might be worth it.
Is that absurd? Is that way too much, or you just don't
No,
like it where Seattle is?
I think that could be the right comp for a different team. I hate the notion that the Seahawks would try to shortcut almost anything with trading these draft picks for veteran players. There's almost nobody in no position. Even the Vita Vea thing, like I get where Jeff's coming from. I want them. I think this team is 2 to 3 years, like at least 2 years away from being like a true contender. And every shortcut they take has backfired for years after years after years. Draft.
They've also traded for the wrong kind of players. Like they have not traded for offense, like Trent Williams. Like when they trade for him, like I think when they trade for a tight end who can't block and ask him to be a blocking tight end, they trade for a Swiss Army knife who can't cover, and they trade for Percy Harvin, who is like a really rare fit. Like if they traded for defensive linemen and offensive linemen, that capital, I don't know if we'd be having that same conversation. So I agree with you, Brian. I just think the trades they made in the past have just been frankly stupid. Like they've traded for luxury pieces that are really.
I think that's fair. And there's a great one in the chat, Buda Baker, who would be on my list. Like he might be someone who's available and is a winner and young and physical and covers. And yeah, I mean,
there's no reason that Arizona would trade Baker though.
No, they're dire. They have no talent.
I know, but they might be.
And they're tied to that Kyler contract. Like you can't rebuild now. Like you got to
try trading Hopkins.
Mm-hmm.
Arizona is a sneaky team. They might trade back in the draft. They are very bleak roster wise.
Yeah, I think they're starting over.
Yeah.
So I agree. They probably won't trade Buda, but like I think I don't think it's crazy. I think they might look if they could flip him for some draft picks.
What about like the Forrest Buckner? Would you trade like a 3rd round pick for him?
Well, maybe, probably.
He's like an older player.
If you're getting into the 3rd round, then I start being much more comfortable.
Okay, so that's the starting point.
Top 60 picks. Like, oh my goodness, we need all of those players to be 5-year starters. Like, we have to close such a huge gap with other teams. I don't know.
That was a great question, Max. Obviously got us talking, so nice job.
Yeah.
Jalen Ramsey.
All right, that's it.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody who submitted questions. We got through all of them this week. We wanted to take time. It has been a extra edition of Real Hawk Talk. I want to thank. Well, actually, before we do this, let's get predictions for this week if you guys are okay with it. Who is going to make the Super Bowl? And let's go one game at a time. NFC title game. Who will win? Nathan Ernst.
I want to say the Eagles so bad, but I think we're going to have to sweat it out a little longer with the Niners.
Dayna.
I think it's the Eagles, probably by 7.
Jeff.
I think San Francisco's going to win, but I'm taking Philly. I can't do it. I can't take San Francisco.
Really? Gosh, I just see Jalen giving them fits. I'm all in on Philly this year.
I just trust their coach more. I trust Kyle more.
I think
You mean future coach of the year?
Stop
Kyle
it, Nathan.
Shanahan?
Yeah,
Do
we didn't
not
talk
pick
about
a
the
fight with
Pete Carroll
me.
Coach of the Year thing.
I know.
Stop it.
We could
No.
talk about that. We could talk
No.
about the rookies of the year stuff as well. I think the 49ers, I mean, everyone is shitting on the Cowboys. Like, that was the thing all week. All the Cowboys fans are like jumping ship. Everyone's like trying to trade Dak, and they're like, it can't trade him. We're stuck. I'm like, whatever. I think the 49ers did not have a game to be super proud of there. And
No,
I think they're playing a significantly better team this week in Philly. It's going to be a madhouse. I think the 49ers are the most talented team. I still believe that. I think the Eagles have what they need. I think they'll be able to win this game, but it wouldn't shock me at all. But I'm going to pick the Eagles in that game. And like the 72 Dolphins, I will like pop a bottle of champagne as soon as the 49ers get eliminated. Absolutely. All right, AFC. I said it on Twitter. People hated me for it. I don't even care. I think it is one of the stupidest things I've ever seen any coach allow to happen when Patrick Mahomes was like carried off the field on the bench by himself, never actually got fully looked at, and then limped onto the field, not able to put any weight on his ankle. And they let him not only play, but play a series. I was like, what on earth is going on? It was so bad that they sent him into the locker room to get x-rayed, but they let him play a series that way. This is the best player in football. Like, that was insane to me. Thankfully for Chad, they had Chad Henne, and he won them the game. Who's going to win against, the Bengals versus the Chiefs? Dayna, we got to start with you. It's in your town.
Oh, let me tell you that the Kansas City press conferences today were ridiculous. Patrick Mahomes walks up there, no boot on his foot, nothing. He's like, I'm fine. It doesn't even hurt. Everything's fine. Practice is going to be great. I'll have to sleep on it after I practice and I see how I'm doing, but I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with my ankle. And I'm like, you's a liar, because he's laying on there and he's like half leaning and he's got no weight on his foot. He took that boot off right before he walked into the presser room, because it's a mess. I will tell you that they are convincing themselves that there is nothing wrong with Patrick Mahomes. But even if there wasn't anything with Patrick Mahomes, I'm still going with the Bengals. The Bengals have beaten them 3 times. And they seem to have their number, especially for that defense. And there is something about this Bengals team. It feels like the chip on the shoulder and the attitude feels so 2013 Seahawks to me. I just love everything about them right now. And bitch all you want about Eli Apple, I don't give a crap. The rest of it is fantastic. So I'm going with the Bengals. I think they're going to beat them for a 4th time, and that's going to become Patrick Mahomes' nemesis for life at that point.
I think that the Bengals' reason for being is to lose to the NFC in the Super Bowl. I think that's
they only did it once. Come on.
They did it in the 80s too.
Oh, fair. Yeah.
Tim Kremmer, I can tell you all about that. But yeah, Bengals, I actually like the guys on that team, but I hate what they mean for the teams I want to lose. Like, the Rams should not have a Super Bowl ring, and it's the Bengals' fucking fault that they have a Super Bowl ring. So I think the Bengals are going to win, and I don't want them to, but I think they're going to win. Jeff, how about you?
I really like this Bengals team, and like their coaching staff is really, really good. I'm going to go with the Chiefs, though. I think the Chiefs' offensive line is going to be a huge factor in this game. They've become one of the best offensive lines in the league, and I thought Cincinnati's offensive line was going to be a huge problem against Buffalo, but I think the snow just negated Buffalo's rush. And I think in a game like this where they got to go play Chris Jones and Frank Clark, I think they're going to be able to win that game by playing a different kind of football that we're used to seeing from the Chiefs. I think their offensive line is going to control the game. And I think Andy Reid, Nathan will like this. I think Andy Reid's going to be the reason they win the game. I think they're going to find a way to do it. They've run with inferior quarterbacks before, so I'm going with the Chiefs.
Yeah, I think it was incredibly impressive for Andy Reid to coach that team with Chad Henne to the AFC Championship, which is why I have him second in my Coach of the Year voting. Clearly the best coach in the league. Haven't dealt with quite the same adversity as Kyle Shanahan, who is another one of the best coaches in the league and very deserving of Coach of the Year. But yeah, I totally agree. Andy Reid gets his team to another Super Bowl.
Got it. Well, we will talk about predicting the outcome of the Super Bowl after that. I am going to say really quickly, I'm not as upset about the Pete Carroll Coach of the Year snub. I am not as upset about the Ken Walker not getting Offensive Player of the Year from Pro Football Writers. I am not as upset about Abe Lucas or Charles Cross not making the all-rookie team for Pro Football Writers. For me, the thing that's going to make me most upset, and it's definitely going to happen, is John Schneider will not get Executive of the Year. And I am telling you, I've said it all year, there is nobody that made a better trade than John Schneider made. There's nobody that had a better draft than John Schneider did. There is nobody that had a clearly superior free agent class to what Uchenna Nwosu. Find me a better ROI signing, or Geno Smith, both free agents, both people he brought aboard. I don't know how else you evaluate. I think the degree of difficulty for what John Schneider did this offseason absolutely laps the field, and he will not win this year. And I think that's a total travesty. So that's the thing that drives me crazy. That's my soapbox. Okay. Thank you all for listening. Thanks for all to join. And thanks to Nathan Ernst at NathanE11. Thanks to Dayna O'Gorman at Dayna OG. And thank you to Jeff Simmons at Real Jeff Simmons. Go to hawkblogger.com right now. Read Jeff's article. It's great. Read Derek's article. And then tomorrow you will be able to read a new contributor, Braxton's article on hawkblogger.com. Looking forward to that. Until then, go to patreon.com/hawkblogger, join Slack, have the conversation, continue there, and we will see you there. Until then, goodbye and have a good night.